Adam Schiff thought he was exposing Tulsi Gabbard as a Russian asset. He brought cameras, charts, and 2.8 million viewers. What he didn't know, the FBI was watching, because Gabbard had given them everything. His Chinese handlers, his Qatari bribes, the Americans who died because of his leaks. This wasn't a hearing. It was a sting operation. And Schiff walked right into it. The Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room crackled with tension as Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard entered her posture military straight, despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. She'd been DNI for only 6 months, but the attacks from establishment figures had been relentless. Adam Schiff sat at the committee table like a prosecutor preparing for a career-defining case. His team had positioned 3 cameras at strategic angles, their red recording lights blinking in synchronization. His iPhone, mounted on a professional grip, streamed live to 8 million followers who'd been primed all week for this moment. The takedown of Tulsi, his tweet had promised. Watch live as I expose the truth about Biden's biggest mistake. Schiff's opening salvo was brutal in its calculated cruelty. Director Gabbard, or should I say, Comrade Gabbard, your presence in this position is an insult to every patriotic American who's ever served in intelligence. You're a Russian asset, a Assad apologist, and frankly, a traitor wrapped in a sari, pretending to be American. The hearing room gasped. Even seasoned reporters looked shocked at the personal nature of the attack. The sari comment, a direct assault on her Hindu faith and Hawaiian heritage, crossed lines rarely crossed even in Washington's toxic atmosphere. Gabbard's face remained impassive, but her eyes, those eyes that had seen combat in Iraq, that had witnessed the true cost of war, flickered with something deeper than anger. She adjusted the microphone with steady hands and pulled out a simple black folder from her briefcase. "Congressman Schiff," she began, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd faced actual danger, not just political theatrics. "Thank you for that colorful introduction. Before I respond, I have one question. Do you know what the penalty is for lying to Congress?" Schiff smirked. "I'm not the one testifying here." "No," Gabbard interrupted gently, "but you are under oath as a member of this committee, and in the next hour you're going to be answering some questions about your own relationship with foreign assets. Real ones, with bank records." She opened her folder, revealing neat stacks of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be financial records. The top page was clearly visible to the cameras. Investigation Summary Reprint Adam Schiff, Foreign Financial Interests. Schiff's smirk faltered for just a moment. "This is a desperate deflection." "Is it?" Gabbard pulled out the first document. "Let's start with something simple. You called me a Russian asset. That's a serious accusation. I assume you have evidence. Your entire record speaks for itself. Meeting with Assad, defending Russia. Meeting with Assad as part of a congressional delegation to investigate the truth about chemical weapons," Gabbard corrected. "Questioning intelligence claims that led to endless wars. You know, the same intelligence claims you're now famous for lying about?" She smiled slightly. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You seem very concerned about foreign influence. Tell me, Congressman, have you ever taken money from foreign nationals?" "That's ridiculous. I've never—" Gabbard pulled out a photograph. "This is you at a fundraiser in Beverly Hills, June 2019. The man next to you is Dmitry Volkov, a Ukrainian oligarch. He's handing you an envelope. Want to tell the committee what was in it?" The live stream chat exploded with questions. Schiff's carefully orchestrated attack was already off script. "That was a legal campaign contribution from a foreign national." Gabbard's eyebrows rose. That would be illegal. Unless... She pulled out another document. It wasn't a campaign contribution at all. This is a receipt from your wife's consulting firm. $75,000 from Mr. Volkov's company for strategic advisory services. What strategic advice does a theater director provide to a Ukrainian gas company? Schiff's face had gone from confident to concerned. His production team exchanged worried glances. "But we're just getting started," Gabbard continued, her voice maintaining that battlefield calm. "You called me a traitor. That's an interesting choice of words from someone who leaked classified intelligence 216 times, according to correlation analysis. But I'm sure you have an explanation for that, too." She looked directly at him, and for the first time Schiff saw what others had warned him about. This wasn't a politician playing games. This was a soldier who'd come prepared for war. "So, Congressman Schiff," Gabbard said, settling back in her chair, with the patience of a sniper who'd found their position. "Shall we begin with the foreign money, the leaks, or should we start with the real reason you're attacking me? The fact that I know what you did in Ukraine in 2019. The hunter had just realized he was the prey, and his 2.8 million viewers were about to witness his destruction. Gabbard pulled out a thick manila envelope marked Ukraine 2019 and placed it deliberately on the table. Her movements were precise, economical, the motion of someone trained to waste nothing, not even gestures. "Congressman Schiff, since you brought up patriotism and foreign influence, let's talk about your interesting relationship with Ukraine. Not the public one, where you champion their cause in Congress. The private one, the profitable one." Schiff's lawyer leaned in to whisper, but Schiff waved him off, his ego still convincing him he could salvage this. "I've been a steadfast supporter of Ukrainian democracy." "Democracy," Gabbard repeated, pulling out a document. "That's an interesting word. Is that what you call taking $2.3 million in payments through various channels from Ukrainian oligarchs between 2018 and 2020? The hearing room stirred. Senators from both parties leaned forward. "That's a lie?" Schiff's voice cracked slightly. "I've never. Gabbard pulled out a series of bank records. "These are wire transfers from Burisma Holdings to your wife's production company, Eve Schiff Productions. $450,000 for a documentary about Ukrainian culture that was never produced. Here's another one, $325,000 from private bank to your son's newly formed consulting firm. He was 19 at the time. What consulting services does a college sophomore provide to a Ukrainian bank?" She arranged the documents so the cameras could see them clearly. "But my favorite is this one, $1.2 million to the Schiff Family Foundation from the Ukrainian American Cultural Exchange, an organization that didn't exist until 2 weeks before the payment and dissolved 2 weeks after." Schiff's face had gone from red to white. His live stream numbers were dropping precipitously as viewers sensed blood in the water. "These are fabrications." "Are they?" Gabbard pulled out another document. "This is a signed affidavit from Andriy Kolesnikov, former executive at Burisma. He's currently cooperating with federal investigators. He states, quote, Representative Schiff was instrumental in ensuring continued U.S. military aid to Ukraine. In exchange, various Ukrainian entities provided financial benefits to his family members and associated organizations." She looked up. "He has receipts, Congressman, emails, text messages, including this one from you. Aid package will pass. Ensure ease payment processes by Friday." "You can't possibly have—" "Oh, but I do." Gabbard smiled slightly. "You see, when you've actually served in intelligence, you learn how to gather it. When you've been in combat, you learn to prepare for every contingency. And when someone calls you a traitor, her voice hardened, you make sure you can prove who the real traitor is. She pulled out a photograph. This is you in Kiev, October 2019. Officially, you were there as part of the impeachment investigation. Unofficially, she produced hotel receipts. You met with 6 different Ukrainian businessmen. Each of them made payments to your family's various entities within 30 days of those meetings. Total amount, $875,000. Schiff grabbed for his water glass, his hand shaking visibly. This is a Russian disinformation campaign. Russian, Gabbard laughed, a short, sharp sound. Congressman, these documents come from Ukrainian prosecutors who are tired of corruption. They gave them to me because they know I actually care about their country, not just about profiting from it. She pulled out one more document from this section. But here's the part that really matters. While you were taking this money, you were also the chairman of the Intelligence Committee receiving classified briefings about Ukraine. Briefings that showed which Ukrainian companies were under investigation, which oligarchs were being sanctioned, which aid packages were being approved. She looked directly at him. You traded classified intelligence for money, Congressman. In the military, we have a word for that. We call it treason. The hearing room was in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Several Democratic senators were visibly distancing themselves from Schiff, sliding their chairs away from him. But wait, Gabbard said, raising her voice slightly to cut through the noise. It gets worse, because the money wasn't just for you. Was it? Should we talk about the deposits to other members of Congress? The ones you coordinated? Schiff stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to these false accusations. Sit down, Congressman, Committee Chairman Marco Rubio commanded. You opened this door when you attacked the DNI personally. You'll sit there and face the questions. Gabbard nodded her thanks to Rubio, then turned back to Schiff. You called me Assad's apologist because I questioned the intelligence about chemical weapons. Intelligence that you knew was fabricated because you were getting paid by the people who fabricated it. Should we go through those payments too? She pulled out another folder. Or should we skip to the part where you leaked classified intelligence to CNN 73 times, always right after getting payments from interested parties? Schiff slumped back in his chair. His live stream had crashed. His staff were quietly gathering their equipment and leaving. The theatrical destruction of Tulsi Gabbard had become his own public execution. I believe in giving people a chance to come clean, Gabbard said, her voice returning to its earlier calm. So I'll ask you directly, do you want to admit to taking foreign money in exchange for classified intelligence and influence, or should I continue laying out the evidence? Schiff's response was barely audible. I want to speak to my attorney. Of course, Gabbard said kindly. Though you might want to call a criminal defense attorney. The kind familiar with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the Espionage Act. She paused. I have some recommendations if you need them, from my time prosecuting these cases in the military. The reference to her JAG experience landed like another blow. She wasn't just a politician fighting back, she was a trained military prosecutor who knew exactly how to build a criminal case. And she was just getting started. Gabbard took a sip of water, her movements unhurried, letting the tension build. When she spoke again, her voice carried the measured tone of a military briefing. Let's move on to your concern about foreign influence, Congressman. You've spent years accusing others of being foreign assets. Classic projection, as we're learning. But what really interests me is your pattern of leaking classified intelligence. Not for ideology, not for principle, for profit. She pulled out a new set of documents, each one tagged with classification markings that had been redacted. These are correlation analyses between your communications and media reports containing classified information. My team found 216 instances where classified information appeared in news stories within 24 hours of your phone calls to specific reporters. That proves nothing, Schiff started. By itself, perhaps not. Gabbard pulled out a tablet. But combined with this, it tells a story. These are Venmo and PayPal records showing payments from those same reporters to your son's consulting firm. $500 here, $1,000 there, always within a week of a major leak. Your son must be quite the consultant. She swiped to another screen. But here's where it gets interesting. The reporters weren't paying your son for consulting. They were paying him as a cutout. The real money came from their news organization's anonymous source funds, $5,000 to $10,000 per leak, laundered through speaking fees and consulting contracts. The committee room was dead silent. Even the CS-PAN camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Let me show you my favorite example. Gabbard continued pulling out a printed email chain. March 2019. You receive a classified briefing about Russian military movements. 2 hours later, you call Ken Delanian at NBC. 3 hours after that, NBC breaks the story with exact details from the briefing. The next day, your wife's production company receives a $15,000 payment for archival footage rights from NBC's parent company. The footage, 3 seconds of generic B-roll that NBC already owned. She looked up at Schiff, whose face had taken on a grayish pallor. You turned the Intelligence Committee into a pay-for-play leak factory. Classified briefing in the morning, phone call at lunch, story by dinner, payment by the end of the week. You had it down to a science. These are circumstantial, Gabbard's voice sharpened. Like the circumstantial evidence you claim to have on Russian collusion. She pulled out another document. This is a text message from you to Jake Sherman at Politico. You forgot that Politico saves everything after they got burned in a previous leak investigation. Quote, have something big from today's briefing. Usual arrangement, need to make Alexa's tuition payment. She set the paper down with deliberate care. You sold classified intelligence to pay for your daughter's college tuition. How's that for patriotism? Gabbard pulled out a thick binder. But let's talk about the real damage. This is an assessment from the intelligence community about the impact of your leaks. 16 human intelligence sources compromised. 4 had to be emergency extracted. 2 are still missing, presumed dead. Their blood is on your hands, Congressman. Schiff tried to rally. You're making wild accusations without what evidence? Gabbard opened the binder. Page 73. A leak to the New York Times about a source inside the Syrian government. You gave enough details that Syrian intelligence identified him. His name was Khalil al-Rashid. He had 3 children. They found his body in a Damascus prison. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes burned with cold fury. Page 124. A leak to CNN about electronic surveillance of Iranian officials. Iran traced the leak, found our assets, executed 6 people. 6 families destroyed because you needed money for your wife's vanity production company. She pulled out a photograph. This is Marina Volkov. No relation to your Ukrainian friend. She was a cybersecurity specialist who helped us track Russian hackers. Your leak to the Washington Post included operational details that led directly to her. The FSB arrested her last year. She's serving 15 years in a penal colony. Her daughter is 8 years old. Gabbard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried throughout the room. You called me a traitor for questioning flawed intelligence. But you sold out real heroes, real patriots for money. You traded their lives for your lifestyle. She pulled out one final item from this section, a USB drive. This contains every leak traced back to you, every payment you received, every source compromised, every operation blown. I've provided copies to the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Justice. They'll be very interested in having a conversation with you. You can't prove, can't I? Gabbard smiled coldly. You see, Congressman, unlike you, I actually know how intelligence works. I know how to protect sources and methods, and I know how to investigate those who betray them. She pulled out her phone. Would you like to hear something interesting? This is a recording from your office. Yes, it's legal. You authorized surveillance systems in all congressional offices after January 6th. You probably forgot that the DNI has access to those systems for security reviews. She pressed play. Schiff's voice filled the room. I don't care if it compromises the source. CNN is offering 50 grand for an exclusive. That's Alexa's entire semester. Make the call. The recording continued. A staffer's voice. Sir, if this leaks, people could die. Schiff's voice irritated. People die every day. My daughter's education is what matters. Make the fucking call. Gabbard stopped the recording. The hearing room was tomb silent. Several senators looked physically ill. Schiff sat frozen, his political career evaporating in real time. You asked if I had evidence you were a traitor, Gabbard said quietly. I just played it for 2.8 million Americans, though I suspect the number is much higher now. She glanced at her phone. Yes, 4.2 million and climbing. Seems like people are interested in hearing the truth for once. She closed the binder with finality. But we're not done yet, Congressman. We've covered the foreign money and the leaks. Now, let's talk about the real reason you fear me, because I know about the Qatar connection, the one that makes everything else look like parking tickets. Schiff's lawyer was pulling desperately at his arm, but Schiff seemed paralyzed, unable to move, as Gabbard reached for the next folder. The combat veteran who'd faced insurgents in Iraq was systematically destroying him with a precision that made military operations look sloppy. Gabbard's hand rested on the next folder, but she didn't open it immediately. Instead, she studied Schiff with the detached assessment of a soldier evaluating a target. You know, Congressman, when I was deployed to Iraq, we learned to recognize patterns. Insurgents always had Tell's little habits that gave them away. You have Tell's too. Right now, your left eye is twitching. That started the moment I mentioned Qatar. Interesting. Schiff's hand moved involuntarily to his face. His eye was indeed twitching. Should I stop? Gabbard asked with mock concern. You look unwell. Or should I continue with the story of how you sold out American interests in the Middle East for a $5 million payoff? That's fantasy, Schiff stammered, but his voice lacked any conviction. Fantasy? Gabbard finally opened the folder. Let's see what fantasies look like with documentation. She pulled out a series of photographs. Doha, September 2018. You led a congressional delegation to Qatar. Officially, it was about regional security cooperation. Unofficially, she laid out photos showing Schiff at various meetings. These were taken by Qatari intelligence. Yes, they photograph everything. And yes, I have contacts there from my military service who are sick of the corruption. She pointed to one photo. This is you with Mohammed al-Rashid, Qatar's deputy intelligence chief. But he's not in his official office. This is a private residence used for off-the-books meetings. Why were you meeting Qatar's intelligence service privately? Congressman, Schiff's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Gabbard continued relentlessly. Let me help you remember. She pulled out a document written in Arabic with an English translation. This is a Qatari intelligence memo describing the meeting. They were very thorough. Quote, Congressman Schiff expressed willingness to advocate for increased U.S. military sales to Qatar and to oppose any congressional investigations into Qatar's terrorist financing. Price agreed $5 million to various Schiff-controlled entities. The hearing room erupted. Several senators were on their feet. Chairman Rubio was gaveling for order. Gabbard waited for quiet, then continued. Now $5 million is a lot of money. You couldn't just wire it to your account. So let's trace how Qatar paid you. She pulled out a flowchart that looked like something from a financial crimes investigation. First, $1.2 million went to your wife's production company for a documentary about women's rights in the Middle East. Strange how that documentary never got made, but the money got spent. She pulled out receipts. Malibu beach house renovations, a new Tesla private school tuition. Women's rights indeed. Next, $1.5 million to the Schiff Foundation through a complex series of transfers involving 3 different Qatari charities. She showed the transfer records. These charities, by the way, are all on the Treasury Department's watch list for terrorist financing. You took money from organizations that fund terrorism. Congressman. She pulled out another set of documents. But my favorite is this $2.3 million in investment in your son's tech startup. A startup that had no product, no employees, and no business plan. It existed for exactly 6 months, just long enough to receive the Qatari money and then dissolve. Your son was 20 years old and suddenly a tech entrepreneur, must run in the family. Schiff tried to speak, but no words came out. His live stream had long since crashed, but news networks had picked up the feed. The hearing was being broadcast live on every major channel. But here's where it gets really interesting, Gabbard continued. What did Qatar get for their $5 million investment? Let's see. She pulled out congressional records. 2 weeks after you returned from Doha, you introduced an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill, increasing military sales to Qatar by $3 billion. You gave a passionate speech about Qatar being a vital ally. She pulled out another document. 6 months later, when Senator Cruz introduced a bill to investigate Qatari terrorist financing, you led the opposition. You called it Islamophobic and destructive to regional partnerships. You killed a terrorism investigation for money, Congressman. But wait, Gabbard said, her voice hardening. It gets worse, because Qatar didn't just pay you for political favors. They paid you for intelligence. She pulled out a classified document with heavy redactions. This is a damage assessment from the CIA. In October 2018, shortly after your Qatar trip, several U.S. intelligence operations in the region were compromised. The timing is curious, don't you think? She pulled out another photo. This is you at a private dinner in Doha with known Iranian intelligence operatives. Qatar maintains relationships with everyone in the region. What were you discussing with Iranian spies, Congressman? Schiff's face had gone beyond pale to a sickly gray. His hands shook uncontrollably. I have the answer, Gabbard said quietly. Because one of those operatives defected last year. He told us about the American congressman who sold information about U.S. surveillance capabilities in the Gulf. Information that Iran used to evade sanctions and move weapons to their proxies. Information that got American service members killed in Iraq. She pulled out a final document from this section. This is a letter from Gold Star mother Patricia Williams. Her son, Marine Lance Corporal David Williams, was killed by an Iranian-supplied IED in Iraq in 2019. The weapons were moved through networks that you helped protect by compromising our intelligence. She asked me to read this to you. Gabbard's voice remained steady as she read, "Mr. Schiff, you took blood money, my son's blood. I hope the money was worth it. I hope it comforts you when you think about the flag-draped coffin I had to receive. You're not just a traitor to your country. You're a traitor to every family who's lost someone because of your greed." The hearing room was absolutely silent. Several people were crying. Even hardened reporters looked shaken. Gabbard set the letter down carefully. "You called me a traitor for questioning wars based on lies. But you took money from a country that funds terrorism, gave them classified intelligence, and got Americans killed. Real Americans. Real heroes. Not the fictional ones you create for your political theater." She closed the Qatar folder. "The FBI has all of this, Congressman. The Qatari intelligence files the bank records, the defector testimony. They're particularly interested in the Iranian meeting. Turns out selling intelligence to Iranian operatives might violate a few laws, like the ones that carry life sentences." Schiff's lawyer stood up. "My client needs immediate medical attention. He's having a cardiac episode." "Sit down," Rubio commanded. "If he needs medical attention after the hearing, he'll receive it, in custody." Gabbard nodded her thanks to the chairman, then looked back at Schiff. "One more section to go, Congressman. The grand finale. Should we talk about the Chinese connection, the one you thought nobody would ever find?" Schiff made a sound somewhere between a sob and a moan. His career wasn't just over. His freedom was in jeopardy. And Gabbard, the woman he'd dismissed as a traitor in a sari, was the one holding the sword of justice. She reached for the final folder with the patient determination of someone who'd waited a long time for this moment. The combat veteran was about to deliver the killing blow. Gabbard placed her hand on the final folder, but paused, looking directly at Schiff, with something that might have been pity if it weren't so cold. "You know, Congressman, in combat, we learned about the fatal funnel. That's the doorway where you're most vulnerable, where enemies focus their fire. You created your own fatal funnel when you started taking Chinese money. Because unlike the Ukrainians or Qataris, the Chinese keep meticulous records, and they love to share them when it serves their purposes." She opened the folder, revealing documents with both Chinese characters and English translations. Beijing, November 2019. You were part of a congressional delegation, but you extended your stay by 2 days. Personal time, you said. Let's see what you did with that personal time. The first photograph showed Schiff entering a building in Beijing. This is the headquarters of China Energy Fund Committee. Officially, it's a think tank. Unofficially, it's a front for Chinese intelligence. You spent 6 hours there, Congressman. What were you discussing? Schiff's mouth moved, but no sound came out. His lawyer had given up trying to intervene, instead, furiously typing on his phone, likely trying to arrange a plea deal. "Let me help you remember." Gabbard continued, pulling out a document covered in Chinese characters. "This is a memo from the Chinese Ministry of State Security. My translator confirmed its authenticity. It even has the official seal. They describe you as American Asset 24. Not very creative, but the Chinese prefer numbers to names." She pulled out the English translation. "According to this, you agreed to provide insights into U.S. technology transfer policies and advance warning of sanctions targeting Chinese technology companies. In exchange, they offered $8 million in various forms. Should we trace how they paid you? Without waiting for an answer, she laid out a series of documents. First, $3 million in licensing fees for your wife's production company to distribute her documentaries in China. Fascinating, since her documentaries are about American politics. What Chinese audience wants to watch that unless the documentaries were just cover for payment? Next, $2.5 million in consulting fees to a company called Schiff Global Strategies, registered in Delaware, just 2 weeks before your Beijing trip. The company's listed purpose, international business consulting. Its only client, a subsidiary of a Chinese state-owned enterprise. She pulled out bank records. But here's my favorite part. The Chinese didn't trust you smart of them, so they held back $2.5 million as performance incentive. You only got paid if you delivered. So let's see what you delivered. Gabbard pulled out a timeline marked with red circles. December 2019, you received classified briefing on U.S. restrictions on Huawei. December 20th, you fly to Vancouver for a family vacation. December 21st, you meet with Huawei executives at the Fairmont Hotel. December 27th, Huawei announces they've found workarounds to U.S. restrictions. December 30th, final $2.5 million hits your account. The hearing room was beyond shocked. It was numb. The scale of betrayal was so vast that people couldn't process it. But you didn't just sell technology secrets, Gabbard continued. You sold something far worse. She pulled out another classified document. This is an NSA assessment of Chinese cyber operations. In early 2020, China's cyber units showed dramatic improvements in evading U.S. detection. They knew exactly where our blind spots were, which systems to target, which protocols to exploit. She looked directly at Schiff. You gave them our cyber defense playbook, didn't you? How many American companies were hacked because of you? How many military secrets stolen? How many identities of Chinese dissidents exposed? She pulled out a photograph of a young woman. This is Li Wei. She was a cybersecurity analyst who helped us track Chinese hackers. After your Beijing meeting, China's systems suddenly could identify our tracking methods. Li Wei was arrested in Hong Kong 6 months later. She's serving 20 years for subversion. Her crime, helping America. Your crime, betraying her. Gabbard's voice took on an edge of steel. But here's the part that really disgusts me. The Chinese didn't just pay you for intelligence. They paid you to influence pandemic policy. Should we talk about that? Schiff's eyes widened in genuine terror. This was something he thought nobody knew. January 2020, Gabbard continued relentlessly. COVID-19 is spreading, but China is suppressing information. You receive a classified briefing about the real situation in Wuhan, how bad it actually is, how China is lying about numbers. What do? You go on CNN and say concerns about China are xenophobic fear-mongering. You attack anyone questioning China's transparency. She pulled out transcripts. Here's you on MSNBC. China is handling this responsibly. Trump is using racism to distract from his failures. Here's you on Twitter. Anti-Chinese sentiment is more dangerous than any virus. You were running interference for China during a pandemic that would kill millions. Why? She answered her own question by pulling out more bank records. Because 3 days before that CNN appearance, another $1 million hit your wife's account from a Chinese media company. You sold out pandemic preparedness for money. How many Americans died because you helped China cover up the truth? The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Several senators looked ready to physically attack Schiff themselves. But wait, Gabbard said, her voice dropping to a whisper. that somehow carried throughout the room. There's one more thing, the worst thing. She pulled out a final set of documents. These are communications between Chinese intelligence and their assets worldwide. They're discussing the American congressman who provided them with something invaluable. She paused, letting the tension build. You gave them the names of Chinese Americans who were cooperating with U.S. intelligence. 17 names congressmen. 17 American citizens of Chinese descent who were helping their country, this country, track Chinese espionage. She pulled out photographs. 3 of them died in accidents last year. 5 have disappeared. Their families don't even know why. But I do. And now everyone does. Gabbard stood up her full height, making her seem to tower over the broken man across from her. You called me a traitor for opposing wars based on lies. You called me a Russian asset for questioning flawed intelligence. You mocked my faith, my heritage, my service. She gestured to the mountain of evidence on the table. But you sold out to Ukraine, Qatar, and China. You leaked classified intelligence that got people killed. You compromised cyber defenses, pandemic response, and counterintelligence operations. You took blood money from terrorist financiers and authoritarian regimes. Her voice hardened to diamond. I've fought actual enemies of America, Congressman. I've seen real traitors. But you're the worst kind of traitor, the kind who wraps himself in the flag while selling it to the highest bidder. The kind who questions others' patriotism while betraying every oath you've taken. She began gathering the documents. The FBI, CIA, and DOJ have copies of everything. The Chinese files alone will probably get you life in prison. The Qatar connections might get you a cell next to actual terrorists. And the Ukrainian money. That's just going to be embarrassing at trial. Schiff finally found his voice, though it was barely a whisper. You planned this. You knew I would attack you. Gabbard smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Of course I knew. You're predictable, Congressman. Arrogant men always are. You couldn't resist attacking the Russian asset, the woman who dared to question the establishment. Your ego was your fatal funnel. She looked around the hearing room, addressing the senators, the media, the millions watching. 6 months ago, when I was nominated as DNI, Congressman Schiff led the charge against me. He said I couldn't be trusted with America's secrets. He was right about one thing: I can't be trusted with secrets. I can't be trusted to keep quiet when members of Congress are selling those secrets to our enemies. She turned back to Schiff. You wanted to destroy me with lies. Instead, I destroyed you with truth. The difference between us, Congressman, is that I've actually served my country while you've only served yourself. As she walked back to her seat, she paused. Oh, one more thing. That sorry comment. My grandmother gave me this sari. She wore it when she became an American citizen in 1967. She taught me that being American isn't about where you're born or what you wear. It's about loyalty, service, and sacrifice. Values you sold for money. The hearing room erupted as Schiff was surrounded by Capitol Police. His lawyer was shouting about immunity, medical conditions, constitutional rights, anything to delay the inevitable. But it was over. The man who'd weaponized intelligence for profit had been destroyed by someone who'd actually served in intelligence. As they led Schiff away, Gabbard called out one last time. Congressman, that penalty for lying to Congress, I mentioned at the beginning, it's 5 years, per count. By my count, you're looking at about 400 years. plus whatever the espionage charges add. Enjoy your retirement. Within minutes of Schiff being escorted from the hearing room, the political and media landscape erupted into unprecedented chaos. The first wave hit social media with tsunami force. # Gabbard destroys. Schiff exploded across every platform, reaching 100 million interactions within the first hour. The live stream clips spread like wildfire, not just the revelations, but the surgical precision with which a combat veteran had dismantled a career politician. The sorry comment meant to wound became a rallying cry as #ProudSorryAmerican trended worldwide. News networks scrambled to process the bombshell revelations. CNN, which had featured Schiff as an analyst hundreds of times, went into crisis mode. An emergency meeting resulted in an on-air apology. "We deeply regret our failure to vet sources, who, as we now know, were compromised by foreign interests." MSNBC pulled 6 years of Schiff appearances from their online archives. Fox News ran a victory lap that even their producers privately admitted felt hollow. The corruption was too shocking for partisan celebration. By 3 p.m., the political establishment was in full retreat. Nancy Pelosi, who had once called Schiff her right hand on intelligence matters, issued a statement so carefully worded it required 3 lawyers to draft, "If these allegations prove true, they represent a betrayal of the highest order. I was clearly deceived." Chuck Schumer went further, calling for immediate expulsion from Congress and the fullest prosecution under the law. The California Democratic Party held an emergency video conference that devolved into screaming matches. 3 members resigned on the spot, rather than be associated with Schiff's disgrace. His district office in Burbank was surrounded by protesters, not activists, but ordinary constituents who'd voted for him, donated to him, believed in him. Their hand-painted signs told the story, "You sold us out. Blood money Schiff. My son died in Iraq. Was it worth it?" At 4:17 p.m., the Department of Justice held an extraordinary press conference. Attorney General Merrick Garland, flanked by FBI and CIA officials, announced the most significant political corruption case in American history. Adam Bennett Schiff has been indicted on 200 including espionage, violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Additional charges are pending as we uncover the full scope of this betrayal. The FBI director added grimly, "We've frozen approximately $23 million in assets across multiple accounts. We've also arrested 6 co-conspirators, including family members who knowingly participated in this scheme." The sight of Schiff's wife being led out of their Burbank mansion in handcuffs became the day's defining image. International reactions came swift and devastating. Ukraine's President Zelensky personally apologized for corrupt individuals who exploited American goodwill. Qatar's government, in damage control mode, announced they were cooperating fully with American authorities to root out corruption. China predictably denied everything while quietly purging intelligence officials who'd left paper trails. But the most damaging revelations came from the intelligence community itself. A joint CIA-NSA assessment, partially declassified for public release, detailed the catastrophic damage: 31 operations compromised, 17 assets killed or missing, untold technological secrets sold. The Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard herself, held a somber press conference with the families of compromised agents. She didn't gloat. She simply stood with Gold Star families and intelligence widows as they demanded justice. The medical team that examined Schiff at the Federal Detention Center leaked that he'd suffered a complete nervous breakdown, alternating between catatonic silence and hysterical claims that "Gabbard set me up." His lawyers, recognizing the hopelessness of the case, were already negotiating a plea deal rumored to involve 40 years minimum in federal prison. Meanwhile, Tulsi Gabbard returned to her office at Liberty Crossing, where she found her staff in awe. "Ma'am," her deputy said, "how long have you been planning this?" Gabbard looked up from the classified briefing she'd already returned to reading. "Since the day I was confirmed, I knew he'd attack. His ego wouldn't let him resist. So I had 6 months to build the case. In Iraq, we called it preparing the battlefield." "But the evidence, how did you get all of it?" She smiled slightly. "When you've actually served in intelligence, you develop sources, real sources. Not reporters you're paying off, but patriots who are sick of corruption. The Qatari intelligence officer who gave me those files, I saved his brother's life in Iraq. The Chinese defector, I helped his family get asylum. The Ukrainian prosecutor, he knew I was the only American official he could trust." Her secure phone rang. It was the president. She listened for a moment, then responded, "Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, there are others. No, I won't stop." She hung up and turned to her deputy. "He wants me to show discretion going forward. Apparently, Schiff wasn't the only one taking foreign money. Will you show discretion?" Gabbard stood looking out at the Virginia countryside. "I took an oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Schiff thought I was weak because I questioned wars. He thought I was compromised because I sought peace. He learned too late that there's a difference between opposing needless conflict and tolerating treason." And she turned back to her desk, pulling up the next file. "There are 14 more members of Congress in these files. Both parties. All taking foreign money, selling influence, some selling secrets. They're all going to learn what Schiff learned today. Which is that I've seen war. I've seen real enemies. And I know the difference between political theater and actual betrayal." She paused, then added quietly, "And unlike them, I can't be bought, bullied, or broken. That's what actual service teaches you." As night fell over Washington, Adam Schiff sat in a federal holding cell, his Armani suit replaced with an orange jumpsuit, his congressional pin confiscated, along with his wedding ring and watch. The man who'd spent years performing for cameras was now under 24-hour suicide watch cameras recording his every moment for very different reasons. His last coherent statement to his lawyers before the sedatives kicked in was, "She knew. The whole time she knew I'd attack her. She let me hang myself with my own rope." His lawyer responded quietly, "She didn't let you do anything, Adam. You chose to attack her. You chose to take the money. You chose to betray your country. All she did was keep the receipts." In her modest apartment near Fort Meade, Tulsi Gabbard was already asleep, her work for the day complete. On her nightstand sat 2 items, her combat deployment photo from Iraq and her grandmother's citizenship certificate from 1967. The sari hanging in her closet, the one Schiff had mocked, would be worn again tomorrow as she continued the work of cleaning out the corruption that had metastasized through American government. She'd faced insurgents in Iraq who wanted to kill her. She'd faced politicians in Washington who wanted to destroy her. As it turned out, the politicians were easier to defeat. They always underestimated the quiet ones, the servants, the ones who'd actually sacrificed for their country. Adam Schiff had learned that lesson too late. Others would learn it soon enough. The warrior-turned-spy hunter had only just begun.